That's all right.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this video. I'm sure if you're a fan of my channel and watch all my videos on prog and whatnot, you will know this YouTuber here, one of my favorite YouTuber. Hello, Notes. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk about these bands.
So, do you want to let them know what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. Yeah. So you had approached me with this idea of five bands that we don't like within the prog sphere, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's going to be a tough ask for me." So I reframed it to more of like ones that we haven't connected with.
I think
Uh,
that's the same here. Some of these, there's a couple of bands on my list that I have put in like the top 10 greatest progressive rock bands of all time lists. But me
mhm.
personally, I do have a problem. And I thought it'd be really interesting and see which ones. And you're a full-on progger, aren't you? I mean,
Mhm.
you really know your prog. I think I first came across you when you reviewed. It might have been Experiments of Mass Appeal, and of course, oh, my
Oh,
reindeer's
right.
trying to attack me.
Oh,
Um,
no worries. As a Canadian, I'm used to that.
Oh, yeah. If it makes you feel a bit happier, there we go.
You know, I'm used to reindeer trying to attack me, right? So I get
Oh
it.
yes, he's cheered me up being there. Actually, I'll try and
Oh,
keep him there.
wonderful.
Yes,
Oh, no worries, no worries.
distract people from
Um,
looking for my old ugly face. Anyway, shall we just kick right in? So I've
sure.
got my 5 to 1, and I've ranked them, of course. Have you
Okay,
ranked
okay.
yours?
I have not. No. So then this was something I wanted to say right off the
Yeah,
get-go. It was hard for me to think about bands that I didn't like within the prog sphere because there's sure there are bands that I never connected with, and those are the ones that I've included. But then I went back and listened to some of these bands to try to figure out what it was that I didn't like about them, and I ended up actually liking them a lot more. So it was very interesting to kind of go back to these bands that I have written off that I'm like, oh, I don't like these guys. I don't want to listen to anything. And then sitting down and listening into them in preparation and being like, oh, this is actually really, really fun. And I'm liking this. So yeah, I haven't ranked them at all. These are just like I have grouped them though, because
yeah.
there's an ongoing theme and a running theme as to why I didn't connect with them and why I'm not a big fan of them.
Oh, that sounds like a good idea. And
Mhm.
the problem I have with is if you haven't connected with a band, you don't necessarily know all the albums, don't you know? And it's like as often you've checked out the famous albums that everybody likes, but you always
Mhm.
worry because I nearly put Magma on the list, believe it or not.
Mhm.
I've
Mhm.
always had difficulty with Magma, but more recently, some of the people who watch my channel have said go and check out the more jazz fusiony ones, and there's some credible
Yeah.
ones. So they didn't get on the list now. So I'm hoping that you, with your vast knowledge, will be able to say, "Oh, they heard that album," and I'll go, "No, I haven't," and I will then go and check
Right.
it out. So this is not anyone who's watching this. If we mention the band, we're not slating these bands, are we? This is a
Mhm.
sharing. And Notes is far more knowledgeable on prog than me, so that's why I wanted to talk to him about it. So, shall we kick off?
Amazing.
Let's have your first one then.
Sure, sure, sure.
I think I'm going to put you down here.
Yeah, so the first one was one that I was asked to review from a patron of mine. And I had listened to it. It's like a very German progressive rock band. And I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of the band, but it was Fleur de Cologne with their album of Minimum. It was this really avant-garde, very like art rock kind of an aspect where it was all in German and all their albums are in German and it's a concept album, very utilitarian kind of a concept, and it's like proto industrial metal stuff because it came out in the 70s.
Mm.
So it blended a lot of things that would eventually be picked up through say like the punk movement or the deathcore movement, but because these were still like very new and very raw techniques, uh I could see the promise, but it was unlistenable because so much of it was narrative. There was no singing, it was all spoken through. And it just, I don't know, for me, it wasn't one that I have gone back to. I did listen to it a little bit, but it wasn't my cup of tea. And there could have been like this disconnect in terms of the language because it's all in German.
Mm.
That was that. I think that was one of the first pieces of prog where I was just like, for me, I don't see a redeeming quality outside of the concept. This isn't one that I want to sit down and listen to. I like it as a concept. I don't like it as a music.
If they were sort of doing proto-industrial metal deathcore in the 1970s, they were really innovative, weren't they? They were ahead of the game.
Extremely. Absolutely. Yeah, but it doesn't sound good, if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah.
like they were doing all these really interesting things and really fantastic things that had never been done before, but just because it's new and they haven't been done before doesn't make it sound good. And I like the fact that they planted the seeds for other people to cultivate for. So in that respects, I really like, I know that I've been kind of saying that it wasn't like I didn't like it, but I can at least appreciate what it was doing for music. So
yeah, I'm always a bit of a sucker for innovation. When I'm listening to something, I will put up with something that is difficult because I know that this band was important in the development of whatever they were doing, you know. But there is I've got a very big prog band on my list that is very influential, and I've never been able to get my head around. So oh yeah, I've never heard of that, but I knew you'd have really incredibly obscure prog band. All mine like massive.
I have a few for sure. I've got a few because yeah, I think most of mine are pretty obscure stuff.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you here for.
Yeah, that was my first one. Yeah, and after reviewing it, I haven't returned outside of in preparation for this video, and yeah, I liked what they did. I like what they innovated, but other than that, and I think they really helped push the krautrock scene as well. But when I listen to their music, I don't enjoy my time.
Well, the whole krautrock thing, I actually have a little bit of a problem with, because there's stuff I like and stuff I don't like. But for me, as a big prog fan, it's almost like a completely different genre. And so you have to go with it. You know, I often wonder why those bands get sort of contained within the prog, you know, genre.
Yeah, I guess
it's avant-garde, punky. It's like their influence on punk is profound, isn't it? You know, and of course, punk's supposed to be the nemesis of prog, although I don't think that's the case really. So
yeah. I think like because they were using a lot of the techniques and a lot of the ideologies of prog, and because prog and kraut came out almost at the same time, like they were almost in tandem, they were sharing a lot of things back and forth. And obviously the krautrock that I love are more of the ones that are more progressive in style, like the Triumvirat, the early stuff that we got from oh shoot, I've already forgotten their name, but like Grobschnitt and bands like that, which are much more in the proggy side of things.
Yeah, Triumvirate, there's some incredible stuff there. I always thought they were a little bit of an ELP copy.
They were an ELP clone, but I don't fault that for them, because Love Dies Hard and Illusion on Dumble Dimple are still two of my favorite albums.
Yeah,
so
I don't know that stuff so well. They did do an album that made my 10 worst albums of all time list, though. That one, the Hamburger one, you know, when they went all new wave.
I wasn't a big fan of that one.
No.
Yeah, I think their first 5, starting with their Mediterranean stories and going all the way up to Spartacus, I absolutely love. But after Spartacus, well, even Pompeii, like the new Triumvirat with Pompeii, was still really good. They had some really good stuff, even though they were going more pop in that sense.
It was the first album I ever heard by them. There was the Pompeii album, and this is the trouble, isn't it? You could go and get an album and you just don't quite get the right album, and then it colors you for the rest of time. Right,
absolutely.
My first one is,
let's go to your first one. We're getting off topic.
yeah no, it's good. You know the people who watch my channel, they love me going off topic, so we will go off topic, and then we've mentioned so many bands, there's got to be something in there for everybody.
Absolutely.
So I've got some big names here. So my number 5, and there are quite a lot of songs by this group that I quite like, but when you said the word connect, I thought this is a band I've never really connected with. There's a personal sort of link to me as well with this band, and the band is Dream Theater.
Okay.
And and it also represents a slight problem I have with all prog metal. I have a problem with prog metal. I can never. I love Rush. I love Iron Maiden, and I love like Voivod, and there's a whole bunch of bands I do love. I love Opeth, you know, and
Yeah.
but with Dream Theater, I've never quite connected with them, and I've never known why. You know, when they first emerged, I can remember I had students, and they said, "Oh, you got to check this new band out. You won't believe it." And they played me What Was Images and Words. And when I heard that album, that was the first album I got with them, and that's supposedly one of their masterpieces, isn't it? And I didn't like the drum sound on it particularly. I didn't even know whether that was drums on that album. It just sounded all very strange. And it sounded like the Iron Maiden end of Rush to me.
Sure.
And that was it. And they were coming out sort of at the same time as Nirvana and Soundgarden, and for me they seemed a little bit out of date, you know. So as time went on, I heard some of their stuff, and I was on the guest list to go and see them live. And then, of course, in 2000 and when was it? 2009. Mike and Jordan became big fans of Frost, so we ended up doing their UK tour, and
amazing.
And we opened up for them. And back then I was quite friendly with Mike. And I can remember, you know, we'd rehearsed up at Prog. Frost was a much smaller band than Dream Theater, so we'd had a couple of weekends getting it all rehearsed up. We went down to the first sound check, and we sound checked, and they came up and they were lovely and said, you know, we love your band. You were really great. You sound great. And then they sound checked, and my jaw hit the floor. They really were truly one of the great bands of all time. You know, the definitive progressive metal band. So that's why they're at number 5 for me.
Okay.
It just sounds like widdly, lots of I don't know. It just there's no, I don't know. It's
like my partner always laughs, and she says, my favorite parts of all the songs are when the guitars and the keyboards go I'm like, yeah, that's true. I'm in a similar boat. Well, I'll say that I connect more with some of their later albums rather than some of their earlier stuff. Like I appreciate their earlier stuffs. You know, Images and Words, I can understand why it's a classic, but for me, it's not one of my favorites. I will listen to everything from like Scenes of a Memory all the way to Systematic Chaos. Like that run of albums for me, I like the little bit more of the symphonic side of things. I like when they have those big sounds. But I can also like earlier stuff is a little bit more raw. Their later stuff, especially now, their last 5 or 6 albums just feel like they're spinning their wheels and not really going anywhere. But yeah, what's an interesting thing, and what you kind of spurred my mind, was the first time I saw them live, I think it was back in 2009 or so around that same kind of time. And I'm from Toronto, so the encore song that they played was Camera Eye from Rush. So they came out with a Rush track as their encore, and I'm like, this is great.
Heaven. Yeah.
So for me, they're one of my all-time favorite prog metal bands, but I can also understand how, especially if you're more used to more of the 80s kind of metal stuff, it just being more of like a little bit of a retread.
I when I was playing with IQ, we did a gig in Montreal, and we were like, God, you know, because we're English, we're like, oh, we're in the Rush country. And I can remember when we arrived at the airport, they were playing Rush in the airport. I thought, oh my God, it's Rush country. So we get to the gig at we were doing the Montreal Prog Festival. That's what we were doing. And we looked up, and Rush were playing Montreal the day before us in the great big thing. So there's a connection with IQ to Rush, because Terry Brown produced It All Stops Here. Not It All Stops Here. I was in the band, and now I can't even remember the band I was in. Not Nom's Armo, but the other one with Paul Manel on vocal. Anyway, that album.
It's not Nim's. Is it Are You Sitting Comfortably?
Yeah, that's the one. Are You Sitting Comfortably? That's. And through that connection, our lighting engineer Lol got a connection with Howard Underline. We got invited down, and I watched the gig. It was incredible. But we arrived there, and Rush weren't there, because obviously, you know, Neil Peart was always very shy, and they just
Hmm.
weren't there. They'd all
Hmm.
sound checked it all. So we arrived, like we went in the back, went into the dressing room, and I met all the guys, sound guys and everything. And this was a huge, big arena. It must have been a 20,000 seater arena. And
Hmm.
Howard goes, "Which one's the drummer?" And I said, "I'm the drummer." He said, "Go through that door." So I opened this dark door, and there was a staircase in the pitch
Hmm.
black.
Hmm.
And I walk up the staircase, and there's a trap door, and I open the trap door, and this is there was a staircase into Neil Peart's drum kit, sat with all the lights on
Oh,
in this in
jeez.
Montreal amphitheater or an Ormo dome. And I can remember just coming out, where am I? And then realizing it, it's sitting down on Neil's stool.
Oh,
My
wow.
hair just I didn't
Uh-huh.
hit it, but my hair just stood up on it. It was incredible.
Oh, that's
Rush, I
incredible.
love Rush. And so I don't
Hmm.
know why I
Hmm.
don't like Dream Theater. I don't know what it is.
I don't, yeah, I couldn't tell you because the two are very similar. And, Dream Theater always references Rush as being like a
Yeah.
massive, massive influence for them. So, yeah, who knows? It's one of those things where it just doesn't necessarily connect.
Yeah, I think with
So,
Rush, there's a certain nerdiness about Rush. There's a
hmm.
certain that you
Hmm.
feel like you're in a gang, a nerdy gang.
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
when I was at school, there was all the, in the early 80s, there's always the kids who were into like the ZX Spectrum and computer games, and we were all a
Yeah.
bit nerdy. Not the
Hmm.
top kids at all, sort of off on the side. And I mean, Rush was designed for those kids. So, and I've always
Hmm.
enjoyed that. I've never felt like we're all being clever. I always felt
Hmm.
like they were like the voice of the sort of outsider, if you know what I mean. Like that's
Oh, yeah.
subdivisions thing.
I was gonna
Where
say Subdivisions is exactly about that.
yeah,
So
but with
amazing.
with
Yeah,
Dream Theater, they always seem like they're very they're being clever for clever's sake. If you know what I mean? I think that's
I
what
could
it
see
is.
that. Yeah, yeah,
But
and I can see that. I can see
in,
that for sure.
incredible musicians. I mean,
Hmm.
Jordan Rudess is just a phenomenal musician.
Yeah,
I mean, they all are.
absolutely.
But
Yeah.
I sat with Jordan and spoke to him a lot, and that guy can play absolutely anything. It's phenomenal.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
for
lovely
Christmas one
guys.
year. Yeah, for Christmas one year, I had Jordan write something for my dad just for like a Christmas card. And he just improved for like 5 minutes. And it was incredible. And he was just like, yeah, this is just stream of consciousness, nothing. Didn't write anything down before coming in. I just, whatever comes is coming. So I was like, that is massive, massive talent. So yeah.
His one of his first big gigs, you may know this, was with Tony Williams and Jan Hammer.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right, and
Yeah.
there's videos on YouTube, and you can see a very, very young, hairy Jordan
I was
Rudess
gonna say
playing
the
just
hair is even more than mine.
yeah. And
Yeah.
when he told me that, I thought, oh my God, imagine Jan Hammer wants a keyboard player,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
they go and get a Jordan was, incredible. So yeah,
Hmm.
that anyway, Dream Theater is it's not on my hate list. I,
It's
I
one that
got a
hasn't
lot of respect
connected.
for them. Yeah, just
Yeah.
and I've listened to a lot of the albums, so I've listened to all, seen them live over and over again.
Hmm.
None of it's
Hmm.
ever stuck in
But
my
just
memory ever.
no, that's fair. This is actually a good transition to my next batch.
Yeah,
So, Fleur de Cologne is like kind of on an island by themselves.
yeah.
The next two I don't connect with mainly because there's no coming together. There's no realization. There's like really good atmosphere. There's a lot of really good ideas being put down, but I feel as though they're always wandering the landscape without coming to any kind of conclusion.
Mm,
There's no rhyme or reason. It just is. It's very like aphromorphic, right?
mm,
Very intangible. And so there will be times when I want to have that kind of directionless, very wandering the landscape without landing anywhere.
mm,
But in my day to day, I want to sit down and listen to something. I don't remember anything from them, and I'd rather not. And I will go to other groups that do similar things, but have those touch pads. So the first one, and this was one that I actually revisited and I enjoyed, but again, it didn't connect, and I'm still
mm.
waiting. Is the composer and electronic mastermind of Klaus Schulze from Tangerine Dream.
Yeah,
Uh, like I love what he was doing in terms of pioneering some of those sounds. Like Time Wind, I know everybody loves because of those two massive epics on the album. And I also really like the first album of Ehrlich, I think is how you pronounce it. Really bad with pronouncing stuff. But I feel like, unlike his time with Tangerine Dream or other composers that were doing things very, very similarly, like Wendy Carlos or Jean-Michel Jarre, or trying to think of, or Tomata, who recontextualized a lot of like classical works. They always had these touchstones that the movements and pieces would arrive to. They would always have these moments of realization. And Klaus always just wandered around. He never really landed anywhere. It was always just like, and now we're going to this piece, now we're going to this piece. And it was very atmospheric, but I need those moments where we land somewhere. I need those moments that everything comes together, and it's been building towards these moments. So I love what he was doing in terms of sounds, but yeah, unlike say Jean-Michel Jarre, which always had these big set pieces that I'm like, ooh, I love when the music came together for this moment, or I love when he recontextualized this piece in this context. Klaus was just more of a, we're going to hold this note for 5 minutes and turn it just a little bit. So yeah, I have returned to his stuff every once in a while, but I will return to those other composers a little bit more first. And I will also return to Klaus's soundtracks because that is a little bit more structured. I feel like it forces him to structure his sounds around themes and movements and moments in his music. But yeah, so yeah, that was another one that I just never really connected with, even though I loved his pioneer work and his work with Tangerine Dream.
That's very interesting. And when you tell me that, it's throwing up a lot of sort of historical factors with synthesizer music and the history of that. And I think this idea that synthesizers were originally invented to try and mimic the sounds of real instruments in a way. And so Wendy Carlos comes in and goes, well, I can do Bach, and I can do these classical pieces, and that gives it the structure. And I think the shock for people was, can you imagine buying those albums in the 70s, and the next album came out, the next synthesizer, and it was a sound world that no human had ever heard before. Everything had been air moving, and then suddenly you've got these sort of electronic sounds. And I think back in the 70s, buying a Klaus Schulze album, you'd probably go on and just be in wonderment of listening to this sound you never heard. Now, of course, you've got those sounds in your iPhone. You can sit there and make sort of ambient things just by tapping, and you're doing it. So I just wonder as whether, as time's gone on, the thing that he was probably his selling point, which was he was even more out there in terms of the ambient sort of almost like Brian Eno background trippy thing, at parties that they would put on. Whether that context has just been lost on us modern people who are so used to those sounds.
I think you're right, because like growing up when I was like really, really young, my dad had one of those like old Yamaha keyboards, and I would just spend hours just pushing the buttons and making different tones. So here I was without like the wall of 3 massive, computer outputs to help create the sounds. It was just me and this little Yamaha thing. So yeah, I think that context is lost, because I can see hearing these sounds for the very first time being blown away and realizing this isn't being made by strings or vibration of lips or the percussive aspects of it. Everything is being produced from a computer, and that being very exciting. But now, as you said, we can just pull up our iPhones and just
hear even more incredible sounds. This is back in a time when a lot of these synths were monophonic, so they're having to, if they're playing a harmony, 3 notes, they would have had to overdub those notes, and then Klaus is there just moving the filters around and getting all these effects, and they go, my God, I've never heard anything like this before, as we've all heard it a million times. The thing that when I realized this, I was chatting to a friend of mine who's an older progressive rock fan, and he said that when he was very young, is it Trilogy by ELP, from the
Yep.
beginning. That album
Yep.
came out, or it could have been Lucky Man. It was one of those, and it was on the radio. And the synthesizer solo when that came on, he hadn't got a clue what it was. He was like, "What is this?" You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what is even going on? And he, as a young sort of teenager, he bought that album because he was fascinated by this thing that he didn't even know what it was. You know,
Yeah.
and I think that magic is we've forgotten it really. So I think that's the thing with
Yeah.
the.
Yeah. I think
I'm the same with Klaus Schulze. It's not that I don't like it because it's pleasant.
it is very pleasant,
It's
like
very
listening to
pleasant,
it.
but
It's great background music,
yeah,
I love when I'm reading or late at night, but yeah, that loss of the what am I listening to? Like the last time that I very vividly remember having that experience of like I don't know how they were able to capture the sound was with the Frost album of Dear Dead Days, where I still remember this was what 15 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
Hearing that
When I had black hair and I was still in the band.
yeah, yeah. Just hearing that sound and being like, how on earth they create that kind of sound? But now it's like, oh, they just did it with computers.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
to be fair to the genius of Jem, back when we did Experiments of Mass Appeal, he was doing such bonkers stuff with sound manipulation that people don't normally do. I can remember he got all these children's toys that he'd read chips and they would and he had a speak and spell that he tampered with, and it created all these sounds. The guitar solo on Experiments in Mass Appeal, John mentions a guitar solo, is through a toy trumpet, a child's toy trumpet. And then at the back end of those vocal or overdubs around about 100 or 150 voices. I've always Experiments in Mass Appeal we worked so hard on, and I thought it was a brilliant album. And we did exactly what he said on the tin. We took the prog thing that we done on Million Town and pushed it to the nth degree. And when it came out, it just didn't fly because everybody wanted Million Town again,
and that for me, that's such a shame because I love both of those albums for very different reasons. And I always felt like Frost was the first and the catalyst of what happened with the neo-prog music after it, because after that, all the bands started being very punchy, very dark, very aggressive. But I always felt like Experiments was kind of like the first one to do that, because after that, Mystery came out with their album that was very much like that. Pendragon did theirs. But anyway, we're getting off topic.
Yeah. And all these bands, they just pay me that little bit, me and Jem and John, they just pay us that little bit, for ripping us off.
Just that little extra bit.
No, I'm joking. And it was all Jem's genius. All I ever did was turn up and do a bit of drumming on it. And to bring it back to Klaus Schulze, Tangerine, that's what Tangerine Dream's got. Tangerine Dream does the same thing, but it's evocative and dark. You don't feel like it's background music. You feel like you're witnessing some sort of mystical event with Tangerine Dream, don't you? And you don't.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I loved about Tangerine Dream is you got that darkness, you have that tangibility, and you have those moments where everything kind of comes together. And I really wish I was around during the 70s to see them live, because my dad saw them and he was like, it was just three guys and these massive computers, and that was it. And I was like, if I could only like experience that for the first time, rather than me when I was a kid with the little Yamaha, keyboard trying to yam out these tracks.
Oh, so it's fascinating. So, am I onto my number 4 now?
I think we're on to because I've got
right, here we go. This is going to upset them.
Okay.
At number 4 is Soft Machine.
I have that one too. That one's my number 4 too.
Oh, lovely.
They came together. Because the same issue I have with Klaus Schulze, I have with Soft Machine, is that they never came together. And I did a really, really deep dive into their music this past weekend, or the weekend previous to that, where I listened to their first 6 albums waiting for something to happen, and nothing ever really did. And unlike the other, like, if we go straight into the jazz, because I know that they're kind of like the jazz fusion, jazz adjacent kind of prog rockers, at least with like Miles Davis or John Coltrane, or some of these other big jazz composers, they will have these like moments of pure innovation, or these pure like really juicy standout moments. And I feel with Soft Machine, again, I really need to go back and re-listen to a lot of them, because I gave each of those albums maybe 5 or 6 spins. It just never really came together for me. I was waiting for those moments and it never happened.
Well, for me, they start off with a sort of, they say they're early prog, but it's almost like that first Genesis album. It's just poppy psychedelia. And actually the vocals give it a little bit of an edge. I think the early albums when they're still singing, but going up to third, which is supposedly the masterpiece, that sounds to me like a British version of Weasels With My Flesh, or
from Frank Zappa and
it just sounds so derivative of that. There is things in there that is different, and that I love that big meaty keyboard sound, the Soft Machine keyboard sound. But like I said, they're improvising, they're being experimental, but it doesn't really go anywhere, and they don't seem to have the chops of a Miles Davis group or a Frank Zappa group. They're not quite there. And as they carry on into the 70s, they sort of then bland out into this sort of fusion band. They're not Brand X, they're not Mavish Orchestra. They're just another fusion band, and they seem to jump into a riff, lock into the riff, and then just go. Now, Bundles with Alan Holdsworth, I love that album, but because I love Alan Holdsworth, so I take that one out. And right near the end of their original period, they did an album called Land of Cocaine, which is really a Carl Jenkins composed album. I absolutely love that album. And that was the first Soft Machine album I bought. I bought that and I loved it. It was really orchestrated and it was just unlike Soft Machine. And I thought, I've discovered this band. And then I went and got third. And I've grappled with third for the next 30, 40 years trying to get my head around that album. And I don't hate it, but it's exactly what you say. When are they going to go somewhere? It's just goes on and on and on. So I used to have an improvising electronic trio called Ley Lines with Fire Janzek on guitar and Steve Lawson on bass, and we did all this experimental stuff, and it was really hard for us to get a gig. And Soft Machine were playing up near me, and so I rang the guy at the venue, said, could we get a support slot? And we supported Soft Machine, and when we sound checked, they loved what we were doing so much that they said you can have a full hour. Soft Machine's audience really enjoyed what we're doing, even though it was really avant-garde, meandery electronic stuff. The Soft Machine guys were lovely. John Marshall's an absolute legend, and he's a really brilliant drummer, and I love his drumming on other albums, and they were lovely. John Etheridge, incredible guitar player, and I'm sure there could be a lot of more recent Soft Machine albums, now that they've sort of reconvened and back out, because watching them on the gig, they were great. But again, they are just a jazz fusion band to me. That's it, that's it.
They're fine, but I don't think they're the innovators that, like, in my mind, they're not the innovators that I keep hearing that people are calling them out to be. Like, I'm listening to a lot of this stuff and I'm like, if I want this kind of like weird avant-garde, very strange stuff, I'll turn to a Frank Zappa, or I'll turn to a Graaf Generator, or I'll go to some of these other bands. But much like Klaus Schulze, if I want something that just meanders and doesn't go anywhere and I just need some background music, then I'll put these guys on, but I won't put these guys on for the distinct reason to sit down and listen to them.
That's exactly how I feel with Soft Machine. And they also, it's like they're the main band of the Canterbury scene, and yet National Health and Matthew Mole and especially Hatfield of the North, which I absolutely love. All those bands are amazing. And then Soft Machine, which don't sound anything like that. They don't have that whimsical English, light, frothy, thing, that they just don't have that. So I've never quite got that band.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So why don't you go again, since we both talked about the Soft Machine?
Say that again
for your next.
Shall I go? So we've both done. It's back to me. Oh God, you see.
Yeah, because I think we both talked about Soft Machine. Soft Machine was the next one for me anyway.
And you just mentioned the next band on my list.
Okay,
which is Van de Graaf Generator, I'm afraid.
Hey, no, that's fair.
Shall I say my reasoning, right?
Go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
as a very young, really young guy, there was a show on the radio in the UK called the Friday Rock Show, and it was mainly new wave of British heavy metal, but they really championed prog. And the theme tune to that was a tune called Theme One, which I think was a Graaf Generator reworking of, I think, a George Martin instrumental. And I absolutely loved that because it had tons of melody and it was absolutely fantastic. And so I thought, I'll go check this band out. And I can't even remember the name of it. It's Porn Hearts, right? That's the same period, roughly. So I went and got Porn Hearts, which is, for many people, their masterpiece. And I listened to it and listened to it. I just did not get it. It was like, it never gets out of first gear. It's really dark and turgid. It's like, and none of the sections seem to relate. And it's just in it. And there's moments of brilliance. Every now and then they go some sort of King Crimson-y riff. And you go, oh, this is really good. This will go somewhere. They do that for a while and then they're out. Now, a proviso to this is that this is one band I really haven't checked out. And when I did my top 10 greatest prog albums of all time, taking my own prejudices away, I put it in the top 10 because I know there's a part of me that knows this is great stuff. Right. I just don't get it at all. I think what it might be is they're just not as virtuoso as the other bands. And I think coming up, I was one of those kids that was, loved all the trickery of Yes and Jethro Tull and all that type of stuff. They don't really have that sound and the production. I don't know. I'm sure I've missed albums later on. Now, I'm jumping at the moment with Tim Bowness, from No Man. And the reason why I got a bit sidetracked, I've just had a message come through saying Steve Wilson is coming to one of the gigs we're doing, and I had a little bit of a.
That's really cool.
Yeah, this just came through now. So that was
really great.
And Tim lives very close to Peter Hamill.
Oh, and, isn't that funny?
Yeah, and so a lot of the prog guys I know, like all the big train guys, they have a little pilgrimage down to meet Peter Hamill. Now, Peter Hamill on Exposure by Robert Fripp, it's on that vocal is unbelievable. And he's an incredible singer. And you see, a lot of these bands I've picked, it's not real hate. I know there's something really good about it. I just don't get it. I don't get it. So you like them.
That's fair.
You like them, don't you?
For me, Graaf Generator took me a while, and I was listening to them at a very difficult time in my life, and so I almost listened to them too much during that time. And so once I got out of it, I couldn't listen to them after that. It was so tied up with where I was at that time, where I was just like, I cannot for the life of me get back into them. And part of it was because of how rough and how grating and how off-putting they could sound. Especially with some of their earlier ones, like The Least We Can Do Is Wave to Each Other and H to He. But Pawn Hearts, I really loved, and it was interesting. I picked up the CD that didn't include Theme One, and when I found a record of Pawn Hearts, because this was back in the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006, when I first picked up the CD. I found the album, the actual LP, much later on, and it had Theme One right at the end, or right between the two songs on the first side, like Lemmings and Man Air. And I'm like, where was this on my CD? This was never on the CD. So but I loved it for the Plague of Lighthouse Keeper. I've still returned to that. I love the big crescendo that we have on there. But I know people also really love God Bluff, and I would put God Bluff just as good, if only for Sleepwalkers. The big crescendo at the end of Sleepwalkers, where everything kind of comes together, it makes the album listenable to me. I also love Still Life, and World Record is one that has that same kind of pitfalls that we were talking about with Klaus and with Soft Machine, where Mergley's 3 doesn't really go anywhere, but it's very soothing, because this was when Peter Hamill was getting really into the guitar, so he was like playing around, and that's essentially him just playing around the guitar. But it's that final track off the album, Wandering, that I don't know, for me it's it's akin to Yes's ending of the Gates of Beryllium with Soon, and it being this final breath. But I can also appreciate and understand why it's such a tall ask because of how grating and how off kilter it is. Like there are some albums from them I don't really listen to because of how strange it is.
They are. I mean, and that's the thing that annoys me.
Yeah,
because I can appreciate weird out there music, but not them. You know, I this you should like this. You should like it. You know, I think it. I mean, Peter Hamill's voice is something that over a track, you know, that's like 20 minutes long, and you think, well, he'll probably shut up in a minute, and they'll do an instrumental bit like Yes, and they don't. He just keeps going on and on and on, you know. And the crescendo at the end of Playing a Lighthouse Keepers, the by the time I get there, I see because I've got the sort of prog nerdiness in me. I can't just go and put it on. I can't just go to the end and go, well, let's just listen to it, because I've got to go through the whole track to get. And at some point, my brain's gone off to somewhere else. By the time I'm not listening anymore, I really don't get them. Really don't get them.
Hey, that's fair. Well, for the longest time, one of the things that I couldn't stand about it was Peter Hamill's voice. I always listen to it. I'm like, how do people think that he has such a great voice? And there are moments where I'm like, that is a brilliant take that he's doing. Like I really love, but like there's so much of that grating that's on it. And the thing that I'll never forgive him for is that I believe he was one of the inspirations for like Sid Vicious and a lot of the punk.
It was for John Lydon. It was John Lydon. John Lydon was a big Van de Graaf Generator.
That's the one. I knew it was one of the big punk bands, and I'm like, knowing that was one of the genesis for punk, I can't I can never forgive him for that. Even though, you know, I know he didn't mean it, but yeah.
Well, if you're not a Sex Pistols fan, go and check out the Public Image Limited album called Album. And on compact disc it's called Compact Disc, and on cassette it's called Cassette. And on that album, it's produced by Bill Laswell. John Lydon's on vocals, and I'll tell you the lineup. On drums is Ginger Baker and Tony Williams. They've got Jonas Hellborg on bass, El Shanker on electric violin, Zaki Hussain on tabla. They've got Steve Vai on electric guitar, and he does his best guitar solo of his career on Ease. And so it's if you're not a punk guy, this is like a world music prog album, and it's unbelievable. So go and check that out. It's one of my favorite albums of the 80s, and I've always put it in as one of the great albums, prog albums of the 80s. And I've always felt that John Lydon actually has elements in his character of Ian Anderson. You know, he's got that Ian Anderson Aqualung character, and he's also got this sort of voice that comes from Peter Hamill. And when I hear Peter Hamill, I thought, this is a guy, it's almost like the Jimi Hendrix of vocals. He's taken his voice and he pushes it into all these areas, and I commend him for this. I really respect them. And when I did the review, I listened to I sat down and listened to Paul Dance. Thought, this has got to go on the list, because I know all the people will moan. They'll always say, why didn't you put it on? Because they always do. And I had listened to it. I thought, this is 1970s, a sidelong epic in 1970. This is a masterpiece. This is really brilliant stuff. And you could hear, you know, that there's Darkness that King Crimson go on later to do, which I absolutely love. It's coming out of here. They're mean and they're nasty and they're not airy fairy like Genesis and Yes. You know, it's just, I just wish they'd do. I don't know. I think musically it's not as sophisticated as like all the other ones. King Crimson, Yes,
no,
Genesis,
that's fair.
yeah. But then Pink Floyd aren't, and I like Pink Floyd, so I don't know. It's
so I can do my last two kind of as one, because the reason, like, both of these are on the list because they are a specific style of very extreme, like, metal music, and for the most part I really love that kind of style. But much like what we've been talking about before, I feel like they never really come together. I feel like both of them are very experimental in their approach as well. But I also don't like metal music that is aggressive for just aggressive sake.
I know what you mean by that. Yeah.
I want there to be a point. I want there to be a like at least some ebb and flow within the music. You know, I don't like metal music that is just up at 11 at all the time. Or if you are there, there's a reason for it. So yeah, these two bands, there are moments that I enjoy on their albums, but I never really connected with them. So the first one is Maudlin the Well. Um,
Don't know them. I
they
know
put
the
out
band, but no, don't know them at
yeah,
all.
they put out two really big albums that people continuously point to as like some of the like most innovative. And I would agree that it's innovative, but just because it's innovative doesn't necessarily mean that it's great. So Maudlin of the Well, they put out Bath and Leaving Your Body Map. Both in 2001. It was a back-to-back album. And then they followed it up 10 years later with the second part. And those who love it, love it. I just don't. I'm not ones that are. And the other one is Slice the Cake, which I believe some of the members are a part of Novena, which Ross Jennings from Haken is also a part of. And they're very extreme, which is interesting because with Slice the Cake, the what was it? Let me just slice the cake because I don't want to get this wrong.
You're on my channel, Matt. You're on my channel now. I get things wrong all the time. So
that's all right. They had Odyssey to the West, which was released in 2016. And that was like the big one that I think people were like really excited for. And that's the one that I just they have one that is kind of a continuation, and it's just one song and it's all atmospheric, and I love that, but it's atmospheric, it doesn't do anything, it's screaming and yelling, but there's no words or anything to it. And yeah, for me, I was waiting for it to do something. And I know, again, people that love those albums, but it just never really did anything for me in that case. And both of the groups, Maudlin of the Well and Slice the Cake, I love in terms of being like experimental, innovative, very extreme, but unfortunately it never really comes together and it doesn't really do anything for me. And I had to really scratch my head as to which of that style of music that I don't really connect to is the best exemplifier of that. So those were the two. And I just kind of wanted to bang those two out because they're very similar in terms of why I don't connect with them.
Yeah. Is it, do you think, I feel that the whole prog metal thing is a bit of an affliction for prog. And you hit it on the nail on the head. And I'm going to try and explain my position.
Okay.
I'm friends with Matt Stevens from Fears of the Dead. Now, Fears of the Dead can knock out a really heavy riff. And, you know, Matt's grown up listening to like Voivod and all these bands. He's got that influence in there. But because it does more than that, I feel that there's a freedom there for one. When you say these bands are all, you know, they're innovative and avant-garde, but you know the lane they're in, don't you? Whereas that with something like Fears of the Dead, when the riffs kick in, because they've been somewhere else, they sound so heavy, and they're not necessarily as heavy as these bands that just bashing everything out as you know, at full tilt. And I think people forget that with them. I mean, because Black Sabbath is still the heaviest band of all time, aren't they? And I think it's to do with it. There's a darkness and there's a sort of muffliness to them. It's really hard to explain. And I think all this sort of ultra precise, ultra sort of, and also trying to show off that you can do the very fast double bass drums, you can do the screaming, fast guitar solos. Yeah, when I first heard that in the 80s, it was incredible. But I've now heard it a million times.
Yeah, and I find when we're dealing with bands that excel at innovation, because innovation is always happening and it's always changing, you can appreciate it for when it's being innovated, but unfortunately you run the risk of also being dated. because once that innovation has taken place, then people will move on and innovate somehow else. And one of the examples that I love to use, especially in the metal side of things, is a band like Meshuggah that really innovated the like that technical aspect, that industrial aspect of death metal, where everything was percussive, like right down to the singing styles. And they were super innovated, and I love that. And I will return to some of those earlier albums, but now that it's kind of more of the status quo, and it's almost like, sure, there's thousands of Meshuggah clone bands, but the new Meshuggah albums don't hit with that same punch because they can't innovate any further, right? Like, so that's, and I feel like with those two albums that I had mentioned, with Marillion of the Well and Slice the Cake, it's like, yeah, they were very innovative at that time, but now since we've moved past it, there are other bands that have done very similar things, maybe a little better, right? So that's kind of my thoughts about that.
My album of the year is the new Avenged Sevenfold album.
Oh, love it. There's a classic example of innovation. Classic example.
To show I'm not prejudiced, I'm not just an old bloke going, when I put that album on, about 2/3 of the way through, I was questioning my very existence. I was like, what is going on? And it had a psychological effect. All that bonkersness. When you look at the title, Life Is But a Dream, I felt like I was in a dream at the end. Towards the end, back end of the album, they disorientated me so much. It was such a comment on our present society and culture. I didn't feel like they were doing, they weren't doing stuff to be flashy. And the playing's incredible. The guitar playing's incredible. Brooks Wackerman's drumming is out of this world. But there's an example of actually a metal band showing the prog as what prog should be at the moment.
Absolutely. I remember, like, one of the things that I got two things. The first one is I feel as though with prog currently, we are always battling either emulating the past or moving things forward. We haven't been able to rectify those two things together.
Exactly right.
We want, and here is, and the second thing was when a lot of my contemporary music reviewers that I have a lot of respect for were reviewing Avenged Sevenfold's Life Is But a Dream, and they weren't connecting with it. They didn't understand it. They were like, this is some of the worst music that has come out within the past 10 years. And I'm listening to it from a prog perspective. I'm like, well, these guys are doing what prog was doing back in the 70s, but in a modern tone. And if you guys think that this is disjointed all over the place and doesn't have any focus, you wouldn't last 3 seconds listening to a Gentle Giant album.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, you'll listen to that and have that same kind of response. So, like, I don't know. For me, I was perfectly primed for that album. And it, likewise, for me, currently, it's the album of the year. I mean, I have a number of releases still coming. I have a couple albums still coming that I want to reserve that judgment for. But yeah, it's brilliant beyond compare.
Yeah, and the one of the tracks on there, and I can't remember the name of it. If you look at it, it's actually Zombie Wolf by Frank Zappa. And everything, and it's actually structurally mirrors Zombie Wolf, but it's not Zombie Wolf. And they do it knowingly. And so they are referring back to, because when the first track came on, I went, oh my God, they've gone prog. Because the first track sounds like 70s prog, but then they were manipulating me. I was shocked at that, but they were like, look, and then they went a bit more to Avenged Sevenfold metal, and they did, and then it just sort of moved. But that when they get to that Zombie Wolf track, it's almost like they're going, yeah, we know we like Mr. Bungle, we know we like Frank Zappa, we know that, because here it is, and if you put them side by side, and the girl vocals come in, and it's the same time signature thing, and and there's the same. It's incredible. Because it's knowing. It's not a rip-off. It's knowing. They know what they're doing. They absolutely do. I was absolutely blown away by it. So it's lovely that we've been able to say all this stuff we don't like, but people watching this, we both agree that at the moment, September 2023, album of the year is his life is but a dream.
Yeah.
And you're much more up on what's going on in the new world than I am. I'm still in the dark ages, but
Oh no, that's fair. Like again, I reserve my final say because again, I haven't heard the Harmony Codex yet. I haven't heard the new Moon Safari or the new Fido album. So I'm holding my judgment because I'm really hoping for good things from them.
The Moon Safari album would be my next bet because they are an incredible band. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And I've been waiting for a long time for this. So I'm trying to tamper my expectations so I don't ruin it, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be
and they're another band because I'm not. I sometimes I think people when I'm criticizing modern prog, it's not like I understand that if you push it too far, it's not prog. You know, it's gone. Oh, this is so way out. It sounds like reggae. Well, that's just reggae. You know, you do have to work within these sort of confinement. And Moon Safari are brilliant at that, and they're actually really brilliant at mining actually quite conservative prog approaches. You know, almost going towards almost like ELO. You know, that right at that end, but doing it absolutely brilliantly. But I'm going to do my last two, and I'm going to try and I'll do so my number two, was Camel. Camel are
interesting. Okay,
Camel are just prog by numbers, 70s prog by numbers. That if you say yes, Genesis, Graaf Generator, King Crimson, they've all got something about them that sets them apart. Jethro Tull, they've got some. But if you took all that away and you were just left with sort of a prog cliche, really well done, it's Camel. I've just never really got it. I've heard them. I heard Snow Goose when I was probably 14 years old. My best mate at school loved that, and he played it over and over again. And I just thought it just sounds like what it is, which is the soundtrack to a sort of 70s nature film. It's what it just hasn't got the gates of delirium. There's no metal bashing halfway through. There's no larks, tongues, and aspic. There's no, there's no thick as a brick, and the humor in that, and the English folkiness. They just don't seem to have, beyond Andy Latimer's very tasteful guitar solos, which I think is what draws people in, and they are very tasteful. There's like the Dave Gilmour guitar solos; they're very tasteful, but they just don't have that slightly. They just don't have an edge.
And that's fair. I will agree that they definitely don't have the edge. For me, that is the appeal of the band. Like they're very airy, they're very light, they're very fluffy, and I love the guitar works and I love the compositions. I do think that they are one of the best examples of what I would call like the second wave of progressive rock. Like they came on the scene pretty late, right? Like I think their first album was 1973.
That's right, and that's the other thing with them is you can think, what are you doing this for?
Yeah,
go and listen to the prog band. They moved on. They're not doing this anymore.
Yeah. So like there wasn't a lot of innovative factors to them. Like they didn't really move the music forward all that much. I still return to Snow Goose and Moon Madness. Like those are my two favorite albums from them. I will admit that Another Night, the first track off the second side of Moon Madness, has one of my all-time favorite bass lines of any song. But I would agree that there's like when I first listened to them, especially with so many people hyping them up, and I know Michael Eckefelt from Opeth cites Camel as being one of his favorite albums or one of his favorite bands. I was expecting something a little bit more. So when I listened to them, I'm like, this is it. It's prog yacht rock. Like it's fine. It's good.
I did my best to personify them then. I thought, and I remember as I was being so articulate, I thought I'm doing this really well. And then you get it with prog yacht rock.
So it's fine.
All of it's fine, and I tell you, I could put an album on, if I was flicking through the radio and it was like Cardi B and then something else, and then there was a Camel, I'd always, listen to this Camel, this is okay. But in the grand scheme of prog things, and I think, again, what coloured me was my friend was into Snow Goose, and that is a very particular album, isn't it? Because it's and this is 1982, and he was mad on them, and he tried to get me to go and see him, and so he bought whatever album came out in 1982, and he played that over and over again. And I don't know what that album is, but I'm pretty sure it's not one of Camel's best albums. It was really rubbish.
No,
it was that,
I can't remember.
Yeah, it was maybe that period where all the prog bands are going completely wrong. They really, too much reverb, DX7s and mullets. You know,
it was the single factor. That's the single factor, which it wasn't great.
Yeah, so I think he kept playing that one as well. So it has coloured them for me, and I think that's a lot of what it is, you know. And Camel. But I'll now move on to my number one. I've saved them to number one. Here they are. Right,
I'm ready.
Everybody who watches my channel, I'm about to really upset you. My number one, top of the list band that I have not connected with, which is our code for don't like at all, is Marillion.
Interesting. All right. Now we're talking.
You really like Marillion, don't you?
Well, okay. So here's the thing that, for Marillion, they have moments that I love, but they also have moments that I do not like. I think the thing that I love about Marillion is, you know, they were really one of the first neo-prog bands. You know, it was them, IQ. I think Pendragon came on around the same time. That really helped rejuvenize the prog movement, and for that I really love. You know, but I still don't like Fugazi. You know, not a big fan of that one. There's a lot of stuff that I don't like from the 90s and even into the 2000s, but every once in a while they'll put out an album that I immediately connect with and I love. Like Script for a Jester's Tear is still one of my favorite albums of all time. I love the Market Square Hero EP that came out before that. Once we get like even Childhood, Childhood End, Lost Childhood, Misplaced Childhood. There it is.
Yeah, that's the one.
I love that one, but I'm not a big fan of Clutching at Straws, and I know a lot of people love Clutching at Straws.
That's the one. A lot of them hardcore Marillion fans. It's Fugazi, Clutching at Straws, especially.
And I'm not a big fan of those ones. I love, you know, Misplaced Childhood, Jester's Tear, and in the Hogarth movement, it's very hit and miss. Like I will either love or I will hate the album. Right. So like Marbles, I love. Happiness is the Road, I love. Sounds That Can't Be Made, I love. Arachnophobia, I love. But then we get like This Strange Machine and Holidays in Eden and Somewhere Else that I'm like, this is just, it's adult contemporary that's trying to be prog but doesn't quite know how to do it.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's I call it dad rock. The Hogarth, and people and see, the thing is, I'll put out albums like, you know, the Rain album, and you'll go to a festival and prog fans are coming up and going, oh, how did this do album? I do really like it, but it's not really prog, is it? And I'm going, well, it's got a 15-minute track about a wizard. How is that not prog? And yet the new Marillion album comes out, and to me it sounds somewhere near Dire Straits.
Yeah,
you know, like Love Over Gold, which has got some long tracks on. You know, the tracks do go on. You know, So this is my thing with Marillion. I discovered Marillion, believe it or not, in 1981, and they were called Silmarillion. I was a big new wave of British heavy metal fan, and Kerrang used to have a slot for bands that weren't signed, and they had a tiny little thing. And I was a Lord of the Rings fan, and I went, "Oh, this band called Silmarillion. That looks really interesting. I'll keep an ear out for that." And then suddenly you had that big neo-prog, you know, 1982, 83, and Kerrang in the UK was really pushing this. And the Market Square Heroes EP came out, and I went and got it. And I'm the biggest Genesis fan. I'm the biggest Yes fan. And to me, I put it on, and it was literally like, well, they just copied Genesis, but it's just not as good. That was it. That was my response to it. Didn't think much about it. I checked out Palace. I liked Palace. And that guy had, you know, Ewan had the horrible mask on, and that was really cool. I once played Rozfest. I went down for breakfast. I sat next to this guy, and I said, "Oh, you know, what band are you with?" And he says, "Oh, I'm playing with the Palace." And I said, "What are you singing?" He went, "Yeah." He said, "And I know, you know, I forgot his name now. This is what happens when you get older." I played with this guy loads. The new thing. Anyway, I turned around to this guy and I said, "So what band you?" He said Palace, and I said, "He goes, I was the original singer." And I went, "You wasn't that one with the scary face?" You know, this had really haunted me as a young teenager. Palace I loved. IQ I absolutely loved. You know, I thought
Mhm.
IQ were dark and heavy and
Yeah.
virtuoso, and you know, Marillion never seemed to be the one of those bands. And I checked them out, oh, they're okay. And then the next thing, they literally go #1 in the chart, and they're stadium level. I don't know what they were like in America, but here in the UK, they were
Mhm.
bigger than, in terms of mainstream singles chart success, they were bigger than Yes and Genesis were in the 70s here.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. I don't
Marillion were
know.
absolutely huge.
Yeah, I don't know if they've ever reached that kind of same notoriety here across the pond, but I know they're huge in Montreal because they'll always go to Montreal.
Yeah,
And I'm like, please just take that extra couple of hours and come down to Toronto.
yeah.
But I get it. Montreal loves them. So yeah, I'm again hit and miss, right? They'll do an album that I love, but I always loved more of, like, as you were saying, I love more of the IQ, I love more of the Pendragon, I love like some of the things that have come afterwards. And I will always say that, you know, the 80s Marillion is the one that I love the most.
Yeah, I mean,
Um
I would go for Script for a Jester's Tear, which I got when it came out. My mate got it, and
mhm,
I had a copy, and then he went and got Misplaced Childhood when that came out, and I couldn't be asked to buy
yeah.
that one. I just that, and again, that it's really difficult, you see, because I do know these. I like Mick Pointer.
Mhm, mhm,
I know pretty well from Arena, and
yeah.
I went to see uh Mick was doing the Script for a Jester's Tear
Yeah.
tour. I
Yeah.
went to see it, you know, and when we started chatting, and I was cracking my little jokes about Marillion, and they were saying the same
Mhm.
thing too,
Oh
that
geez.
somebody
Yeah.
come up and said to Mick something like, "Oh, you look like you're really enjoying yourself when you were playing Grendel," and Mick turned around and said something like, "Oh, enjoying yourself and Grendel, those two words never go together." So um,
Yeah. Oh boy.
you know,
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm still confused because I know a lot of people consider their last two albums, what an hour before it's dark and Fear as some of their best works.
yes,
And I'm like,
exactly, that's it.
I can't listen to those two. Like I will return to Fear once a year, along with, and again, IQ's my favorite neo prog group.
They are
Like
the best one.
they for
You've
me,
got great taste there. They are the best
yeah,
one.
thank you. But I will do the same thing for Road of Bones, where a lot of people will consider Road of Bones their favorite album, and I'm like, I will listen. I don't understand it. You know, like I enjoy Road of Bones, but it never connected with me the same way. So those two albums, Fear and Road of Bones, I will return to every other
Mm.
year or so just to see if maybe I'll finally understand why people love these two albums when IQ had masterpieces with Frequency and Dark Matter and Ever, and you know the first couple of albums, and I don't hear that same kind of draw. And same with Marillion with Hour Before It's Dark and Fear. I'm like, well, it's no Marbles, it's no Brave,
Mm.
it's no Jester's Tear. I don't get what's drawing you guys in, you know.
I don't.
So
what was the last album that came out? Is that Fear? Is it? I don't even know the title.
For Marillion, I think it
It's
was
got
An
the
Hour
color.
Before It's Dark.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
with the color wheel on it. Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
sat down and really listened to that, and I thought there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing I don't like about it. It's
Mm-hmm.
not jarring. It's not like I don't like it, but when's this
Mm-hmm.
track going to kick in? And
Mm-hmm.
it seems it's not that it's just a bit dull to me. It really does sound like it's it needs to have it doesn't need to have the edge of a Dire Straits. It's like there's no
Mm-hmm.
edge.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in there really
Yeah. Yeah.
to that I don't. And I've the amount of prog festivals I've played at and some bands on stage, and I think, why is this band prog? I do not understand why Mostly Autumn is prog. I don't
Right.
understand. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that fan, and this really for me does go back to Marillion, because Marillion was so huge in the UK that they consolidated a prog scene of which I have worked and I still work now, and it's
Yeah.
an absolutely incredible thing. And that's down to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Marillion. They created a fan base, and that fan base will stick by you, to the
Yeah.
end of time. And that's down to
Mm-hmm.
Marillion. So they must have done
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
something right, but I just do not get it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair. And I at least really appreciate Marillion in terms of innovating the album release, you know, because I think
Without
they
a
were one
doubt,
of the
yeah.
first, they were one of the first to do like the fan
Like a
financed
Kickstarter.
album,
Yeah.
like a
Like a
Kickstarter
Kickstarter. Yeah,
before Kickstarter came out, you know.
they are so important for that. And
Oh,
here in the
absolutely.
UK, Fish is almost like a celebrity. He's on TV programs, he
Sure.
acts and
Yeah.
all that type of thing. And I wonder whether it was Fish's charisma as well that
Hmm.
was an X factor. When I played in IQ, I felt Pete was equal. That he had such a
Absolutely.
absolute,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, you could just put a picture of Pete up and you go, well, that's IQ. If you've got the white gloves on or whatever, you know.
Yep. Yep.
And but I'm glad you mentioned the album on Frequency, because
Hmm.
that band was in a bit of turmoil at that point. It's the only
Yeah.
studio album I drummed on, and which Martin Orford was on his way out,
Yeah.
and it was, and the fans really love it. But again,
Hmm.
ever, you know,
Yeah.
the Ledge was their bass player come in when they'd
Hmm.
reformed and got on their own label, and then he commits suicide. And that album is
Yeah.
that, you know, is driven by a darkness. I think
Hmm.
there's a
Hmm.
darkness in the best prog for me. I think that's what it is. It's come out over and over again. There's a
Hmm. Hmm.
darkness and a compelling evocativeness to the best prog,
Yeah.
and I think we can all say that that has been the things that have, the bands that haven't got that for us, that we don't like. Would you say that?
I would, but I also would say that my favorite expression of prog is when it's the celebration of sound. For bands like IQ and the Flower Kings, and even to a little extent like Spock Spirit and whatnot. But like part of the reason that I love bands like Moon Safari is because they are able to excel without that darkness, and
They
it's
are,
almost
yes.
in spite of the darkness that they excel. And I would even say like some of my favorite tracks for more contemporary bands, like say Big Train, the tracks that I love the most have that little bit of that darkness in it, you know, like
Mm,
Judas Unrepresented. I love that track so much because it has that little bit of the darkness in it,
mm.
you know. So yeah.
There's something very enjoyable about Big Trent, and they also,
Mhm,
you know, I am a British person. I'm an English person. I think
mhm.
Englishness is essential to good prog. I think there's an
I could see that.
English whimsy,
Mhm,
which all my favorite bands seem to have. You know, and there's
mhm,
bands outside of the prog, like the Beatles, for example, that they have it, and
mhm.
even a band like Oasis has it, and
Yeah,
you know, Kate
yeah,
Bush has it. It's a sort of
yeah.
Englishness that combines really well with, you know, sort of American rock and roll type of thing, and that's a magical thing for me. Um,
Mhm.
and Marillion
Yeah,
have that. They
absolutely.
do. They, you know, those neo prog bands have it.
Mhm,
And Marillion has
mhm,
it. Yeah. I just, it's the bane of my life, because you know that a lot of the real hardcore viewers of my channel started off as fans
mhm,
of IQ, and they love
mhm,
Marillion. So I know
mhm.
I've upset them all. I'm ever so sorry, everybody.
Hey, it's okay. You know, I always was wondering why Marillion was always kind of like the poster child, the best of the neo prog groups, when I connected a lot more with Arena, with IQ, and then later on with this, you know, second or third wave of that with Mystery and Frost and those types of bands that continued on that
Mm.
kind of darker neo approach. Um,
Who would you
yeah,
say is doing that right now, the new bands?
I'm seeing a lot of stuff, like only because they've put out albums all this month and past months. I'm seeing a lot of stuff from Australia.
That's, yeah,
Um,
the sort of King Gizzard.
you know,
Yeah, and
like King Gizzard, but also like Ben Craven. I was seeing a lot from Michael Mills, even like Unitopia and Southern Empire had just put out. So like all
mm,
these bands now coming out of Australia are really not like nailing it out of the park. But much to your point, I still think that some of my favorite prog, and especially like more of the prog that was emulating the stuff from the past, are still coming out from like the UK and Britain.
mm,
Like I believe, was it I Am the Manic Whale?
yeah.
that put out the Bumper Book of Mysteries, which is probably my second favorite album of this year, next to Avenged Sevenfold. I think that those.
I might be playing with them in a few weeks. I don't know.
Oh,
I think
they're.
Rain's doing a gig somewhere, and and it could be I Am the Manic Way. I've seen them a couple of times. Yeah, they're very good.
Oh,
Great band.
yeah. I was really floored with that album. So yeah, I think that is where I'm keeping my eye currently on the current prog sphere. Because yeah, there's a lot of really exciting things coming out of that.
There is, yes. Do you ever get over to the UK at all?
Unfortunately, no. And I have like a handful of friends over the UK, but I've never crossed the pond. Yeah, I've usually stuck to Canada, and I've done a little bit of traveling in the States, but it's mainly Canada, just because there's so much over here. And I think in Canada, in terms of like prog stuff, we have a lot of really great metal and extreme stuff, but not a whole lot of straight up classic prog. Which is a little bit of a shame, because when I was living in Toronto for like 10 years, most of the acts that I would see are the UK acts, like when Haken came over, and even a lot of the Swedish stuff, like when Leprous came over. But in terms of like the local stuff, it was like Protest the Hero, or those very aggressive, very tech death metal stuff, which is great, and I love that moment. But I'm like, where's that classic prog stuff that I love?
Yeah, I when I did play Montreal Prog Festival, there was a lot of Canadian bands on it, but if my memory serves me right, they could have been tribute bands as well. I know Musical Box were headlining the other night, and IQ were doing them. We were the main headline on that night, but there was some good stuff on there. But it's a long time ago now. You see, my prog period has passed. It's all YouTube now. I'll just sit there trying to think of the next video to do.
And that's fair. I mean, that's my life, is always thinking about what's the next video I'm going to have to do. So
notes. I'm so pleased, because many years ago, when I thought, oh, this bloke's reviewed Experiments of Passage, and I saw your channel, and then I did a deep dive, and I thought you would do really knowledgeable, really amenable, absolutely brilliant channel. And I've watched it all this time. And when I started to do my YouTube, there's a number of people, Sea of Tranquility guys, you, classic album review, they were the ones I was watching, and I thought I could have a go at this. So you've inspired me to do this, and I'm here. 17,000 subscribers, and I'm so happy to have you on the show. And I hope now we've met, because it's nice to meet another YouTuber. I'm really chuffed to have
absolutely
to have you on the channel. All my lot will know who you are, so it'll be great. And so hopefully next time I could come across and have a go on yours at some point, if you want to.
Absolutely. I already have a few ideas that I'm going to float your way to see if we can get you on my channel.
I'm happy to talk about all these old bands, and if you want me to grab the bald-headed bass player John Jowett, I'll get him on as well. I'll bring him over.
Absolutely.
He literally lives up the road from me. It's bizarre. It's
perfect. Yeah, prog people just find themselves, right?
Yeah, they really,
just always come together.
Yeah, lovely. All right, shall we? I'm right. Thanks for doing that, Notes. I'm going to say goodbye to all of you, and of course, it's gone dark now here. I should have put my light on, because I'm in the sort of the blue light.
It's that darkness, the darkness in the songs.
It is, yeah. I've been going darker as we've got on. If you like this video, please like it. If you want to see more, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. You can support me on Patreon. I also have a tip jar. Do you have a tip jar?
I do, but I never use it. I have a Patreon, so that's the easiest way to support me.
Yeah. So if anybody doesn't know who this guy is, can you tell us where you are? What your
Yeah, so I'm on most socials under Notes Reviews. YouTube is Notes Reviews. I'm actually on my way to record a podcast, because I've got 1,000 different podcasts. So there's Quid Prog Quo, there's the Metalhead, and the IP address. Yeah, I'm hard not to find. I like to think.
Notes knows their stuff. You really do. I've got to say, you really do. People, they don't realize what people like you are like. I know, because I do YouTubing, and my take has been a drummer, and I've been a musician. I've played with some of these bands. I got a take on it. I haven't got anywhere near the knowledge of you. It's incredible. So You know, if you want to know, especially because you all have a go at me for not knowing what's going on with the new stuff, go and see notes. You review new stuff all the time. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I will stop the recording now if I can.